Picture this, a bright afternoon in a small North Carolina town. Talia Brown, a soft-spoken, hard-working black woman, steps outside her local grocery store to find two police officers blocking her path. Without warning, they demand she step aside. Confusion swirls in her eyes, but before she can speak, they shove her against the squad car and slap on the cuffs. Furious shoppers look on, but no one dares to intervene. Talia cries out, insisting they have the wrong person. She pleads for someone to call her husband. Little does anyone know, her husband is Delta Force, stationed at Fort Bragg, and he's about to turn their world upside down. Talia Brown had always taken pride in her calm demeanor. Born and raised in Durham, North Carolina, she'd learned from a young age how to navigate the complexities of life as a young black woman in a city where subtle prejudices lingered beneath the surface. Yet, despite the challenges, she'd never considered leaving. Durham was home, and so was the entire state. She met her husband, David Brown, when he was a fresh-faced recruit at Fort Bragg, now officially Fort Liberty, near Fayetteville. Their courtship was fast, filled with genuine affection and the unbreakable bond that forms when two people share absolute trust. Now, Talia was 30 years old, working as an accountant at a small firm in Raleigh. She was as law-abiding as they come, never a speeding ticket, never a parking violation. On that fateful day, she'd stopped by a local grocery store after work to pick up produce and a birthday cake for her niece. She was running a bit late for the family get-together planned that evening, but she couldn't help smiling at the thought of her niece's shining face. She never saw the trouble coming. She was nearly to her car when officers John Mercer and Alex Powell approached. The sun seemed unnaturally bright as it reflected off their polished badges. The officers looked tense, scanning the parking lot as if expecting a hardened fugitive to leap out at them. "Ma'am," Mercer barked, his voice laced with suspicion, "we need to ask you a few questions." Talia paused, groceries in hand, completely caught off guard. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice steady. Mercer's eyes narrowed. "We need you to put down those bags and place your hands behind your back," he said. Ignoring her question entirely. A cold dread began to seep into Talia's stomach. This felt wrong. She'd done nothing, absolutely nothing, that warranted being questioned, let alone cuffed. People in the parking lot slowed their steps, pulling out phones, gawking. Talia took a deep breath. "Officers, can you please tell me what's going on?" Without answering, Officer Powell forcibly grabbed her arm, twisting it behind her back. Talia yelped in pain. "Hey!" she exclaimed, her tone laced with shock. "You can't just—" Before she could finish, she felt the sharp cold of metal encircling her wrists. Panic bloomed in her chest. Cars screeched to a halt as passers-by paused, uncertain whether to help or to keep moving. Some even filmed the scene. From the corner of her eye, she noticed a teenage girl holding her phone aloft, capturing every moment. As Talia tried to turn her head, Mercer read her Miranda rights. His voice sounded hollow, mechanical. "You have the right to remain silent." Talia's heart hammered in her ears. None of this made any sense. "I need to call my husband," she managed to say. "Please, there's been a misunderstanding," Officer Powell snorted. "Yeah, we bet. Let's see if you're still singing that tune when we get to the station." Inside, Talia was screaming with confusion and worry. David was in the field. On a special assignment, he was often gone for days or weeks at a time, and when he was home, his presence always made her feel safe. She needed to reach him somehow. If only he knew what was happening. At the police station, Talia found herself taken to a small interrogation room. The fluorescent lighting cast harsh shadows on the stark white walls. She remained cuffed to a metal chair, her wrists aching from how tightly the officers had secured the restraints. Her thoughts spiraled. Is this actually happening? Why me? She struggled against the surreal haze settling over her consciousness. Officer Mercer placed a manila folder on the table. "Talia Brown, correct?" he asked. She nodded. He flipped open the folder. We have reason to believe you were involved in a string of burglaries across Raleigh and Durham over the last 6 months. The air stilled. She almost laughed. This was too absurd. Are you kidding me? She said, exasperation overwhelming her usual composure. I've never burglarized anything in my life. Mercer and Powell exchanged glances. Powell tapped a photograph with his index finger. That's you on the security camera, right? He asked, sliding it across the table. Talia squinted at the blurry black and white image. The figure was female, wearing a hooded sweatshirt. She looked to be about the same height, but the image was far from clear. Talia had an airtight alibi for that day. She'd been at work, hunched over spreadsheets and tax forms. That's not me, she said firmly. I can prove it. My workplace has time-stamped emails. There must be security footage. Mercer crossed his arms. We've heard every excuse in the book. Just because you're not wearing that sweatshirt now doesn't mean you're off the hook. Talia inhaled sharply, shutting her eyes for a moment to steady herself. She couldn't believe how unprofessional and biased these officers were being. For a second, she considered whether their assumptions were fueled by her race. How many times had she heard stories of innocent black people being mistaken for criminals they resembled only slightly? Call my office manager, Talia pleaded. Her name is Julia Dawson, and she'll tell you I was at my desk the entire day. There was a mandatory team meeting. I had no reason to be anywhere else. Powell looked unconvinced. We have a witness who told us a black woman was casing one of the neighborhoods that was robbed. They said she was well-dressed, trying to pass off as a realtor. Talia blinked, stunned. She was indeed a professional woman who dressed well for her job, but that description could fit half a dozen women in the area. This is insane, she muttered. I am telling you the truth. Mercer only smirked. Well, we'll see soon enough. After hours of being left in the cold interrogation room, Talia was finally allowed one phone call. She dialed David's number with trembling fingers, praying he would pick up. When the line rang and rang, her heart sank. She left a brief voicemail, her voice trembling. David, I've been arrested. I didn't do anything wrong. Please, if you get this, help me. She hung up, her mind racing. If David was on a classified assignment, there was no telling when he'd check his phone. Her next thought was to call her lawyer, but the officers took her phone away. They told her she couldn't make another call, she'd used up her one. She asked to call her mother, her father, her siblings, anyone. The officers refused. Even the mention of her lawyer fell on deaf ears. They insisted Talia was one of the prime suspects, and that she'd get a public defender eventually. Fury brewed in Talia's chest, but she knew better than to lash out. She needed to keep her composure or risk further trouble. That night she was tossed into a holding cell with a few other women, some of whom looked frightened, others resigned. Talia tried to lay down on the thin cot to rest, but sleep was impossible. She stared at the ceiling, imagining David storming the station once he found out. If only he'd answer. David Brown was a member of Delta Force, the honest Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. He was no stranger to stressful situations. He'd spent nights hidden behind enemy lines and days navigating complex, dangerous missions to protect his country. Yet he'd never felt fear quite like the fear that gripped him when he heard his wife's voicemail. He'd been out in the field on a training exercise at Fort Bragg's remote compound. Communication was limited, but he managed to catch Talia's message when he checked his phone late at night. As soon as he heard the distress in her voice, everything in him coiled into a single, rigid determination. She needs me now. He left messages for his commanding officer explaining the emergency. Within minutes, David had clearance to leave. That kind of urgency was generally reserved for life and death family emergencies, but a Delta Force soldier's spouse in trouble certainly qualified. By dawn, he was in his car, driving 2 hours back to the police station in Raleigh. When David entered the precinct, dressed in civilian clothes but carrying the unmistakable aura of a trained operator, the tension in the room shifted. He moved with purpose, scanning the reception area. Behind the counter sat a bored-looking clerk. "I'm here to see my wife, Talia Brown." "She was arrested yesterday," David said, his tone controlled but tight. The clerk typed into the computer. Her eyes flicked to him and then back to the screen. "She's still in holding," the clerk said casually. "Probable cause for burglary. You'll have to wait for her arraignment." David's composure threatened to slip. "Where is Officer John Mercer?" he asked. "I need to speak to him immediately." The clerk shrugged. "He might be in the back or out on patrol. I can't be sure." David leaned in, voice dropping to a low growl. "I strongly suggest you find him." He slid his military ID across the counter, followed by a small coin, his Delta Force Challenge coin, emblazoned with a dagger and an American flag. "This is serious." The clerk's face went pale when she saw it. She swallowed, nodded, and disappeared into the back. Within moments, Officer Mercer appeared, arrogance in his stance. He looked David up and down. "So, you're Talia Brown's husband," he said, crossing his arms. David's jaw clenched. "That's right. I'd like to know why you have my innocent wife locked up." Mercer shrugged. "She's a suspect in a burglary ring. We have witnesses and camera footage." David locked eyes with the officer, his tone ice cold. "Release her now, or I'll make sure you regret every second you've held her." Unbeknownst to Mercer, David had spent his drive home making calls to lawyers and friends in high places. One of David's college buddies was an attorney at a prominent law firm in Raleigh. Another was an officer in the local district attorney's office. By the time David confronted Mercer, the wheels were already turning. Mercer sneered. "Oh, you'll make me regret it. Is that a threat?" "It's a promise," David replied, his posture rigid. "And not because I'm trying to intimidate you. I don't have to. The truth will do the job just fine." A flicker of uncertainty passed over Mercer's face. He opened his mouth to retort, but was cut off by a sudden commotion. Officer Alex Powell rushed in, phone in hand, shouting that the district attorney's office was on the line, demanding an immediate review of Talia Brown's case. Mercer shot David a look of anger, then followed Powell into a nearby office, slamming the door behind him. David took a breath, forcing himself to remain calm. This was the kind of situation he usually avoided. He was trained to fight in places where protocol was different, where immediate decisions could mean life or death. But this was a new battlefield, one where political connections and legalities reigned. He had no intention of letting Talia spend another minute in a cell. Inside the cramped office, Mercer picked up the call on speaker. "Yes, District Attorney Westwood," he said, forcing politeness. The DA's voice blared from the phone. "Officer Mercer, I have it on good authority that you may have acted prematurely in arresting Talia Brown. I'd like to know what evidence you have to back up the charges." Mercer began rattling off the so-called evidence. A tip from an anonymous witness, a blurry security camera image, the similarity in clothing and build. The DA listened, occasionally interjecting with pointed questions. Then she delivered the blow. "Well, Miss, Brown's employer has just sent over time-stamped logs and security footage from her office building on the very day you claim she was caught on camera across town. There's a video of her walking into that office at 8:55 a.m. and leaving at 6:12 p.m. The burglary occurred in Durham around 4:00 p.m. Unless Talia Brown can teleport, you've got the wrong woman." Silence thickened the air. Mercer couldn't respond. His face went red with embarrassment and anger. The DA continued. "On top of that, I've heard multiple complaints about you and Powell from members of the public who were at the scene of the arrest. They claim you used excessive force on Miss Brown. We'll be investigating that as well. I suggest you release Miss Brown immediately and apologize." Mercer's hand tightened on the phone. Understood, he ground out through clenched teeth. The call ended, leaving him stewing in rage. Moments later, David watched as Talia emerged from the back, escorted by a sheepish-looking Officer Powell. She looked exhausted, her hair disheveled, but relief washed over her face when she saw David. He crossed the station in 3 strides, sweeping her into a protective embrace. Talia's eyes brimmed with tears of relief. "You're okay," David murmured, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I'm here now." Mercer glared at them from behind the counter. He clenched his jaw, then cleared his throat. "Miss Brown," he said, voice low, "you're free to go." Talia turned to face him, anger searing in her eyes. Before she could speak, Mercer added, We apologize for the misunderstanding. It took every ounce of Talia's self-control not to lash out. But the humiliation, the fear, the frustration of the last 24 hours churned inside her. She didn't dignify him with a response. Instead, she slipped her hand into David's, who led her out of the station and into the warm morning sun. Her release might have come swiftly in the end, but the damage had been done. Once home, Talia tried to calm her racing thoughts. She drew a warm bath, letting the steam and the scent of lavender ease the tension in her muscles. David prowled the house, adrenaline still pumping through his veins, phone in hand, discussing next steps with his attorney friend and colleagues at Fort Bragg. Talia overheard snippets of the conversation: excessive force, wrongful arrest, lawsuit. When David entered the bedroom where Talia rested, she finally let her tears flow. "They treated me like I was some criminal," she managed between sobs. "I was terrified." David sat beside her, gently pulling her into his arms. "I won't let them get away with this," he promised. "Neither will our lawyer. The station is in hot water right now, and trust me, karma will come for them." "Big time," Talia nodded, sniffing. She believed him. Delta Force soldiers were known to be unstoppable forces once they set a goal, and David's only goal now was to find justice for his wife. True to David's word, the district attorney's office launched a formal investigation. Over the coming weeks, more revelations came to light. 1. Faulty witness. The tip that led officers Mercer and Powell to Talia turned out to be from an elderly neighbor with known biases. She'd repeatedly called the police on black residents for looking suspicious, even when they were simply jogging in the neighborhood or picking up mail. 2. Negligent procedures. Mercer and Powell had done minimal investigation before descending on Talia. The victim of the burglary had never identified Talia in any lineup. They'd simply taken the tipster's word and matched it to the vague footage of a woman in a hooded sweatshirt. 3. Excessive force complaints. Multiple bystanders recorded Talia's arrest, capturing how Mercer and Powell had manhandled her without provocation. Some passers-by even testified that Talia cooperated fully, showing no aggression. As these facts emerged, local news outlets picked up the story. Suddenly, Talia found herself in the public eye. A local affiliate of ABC11 WTVD, a well-known station in North Carolina, ran a segment titled "Innocent Woman Wrongly Arrested, Police Under Fire for Racism." The footage from the grocery store parking lot was played on repeat, outraging many viewers who saw Talia pinned against the squad car like a dangerous criminal. Officer Mercer tried to defend his actions in a televised statement, claiming they had probable cause and were acting in the public's best interest. But public sentiment was quickly turning against him. Days turned into weeks, and soon the entire Raleigh Police Department was enveloped in scandal. The mayor, under pressure from civil rights organizations, demanded a thorough review of the department's policies, especially regarding racial profiling. Peaceful protests formed outside the station. Signs reading "Justice for Talia" and "Stop Police Racism" dotted the sidewalks. Talia, initially shy about the spotlight, found herself invited to speak at a local community forum. She stood at the podium, voice trembling slightly, but words resolute. "I believe in justice," she began, looking out at the sea of supportive faces. No one should be afraid of the people sworn to protect them. I'm not here to vilify all officers, but I am here to say that accountability matters. Her speech electrified the crowd. Media coverage grew, highlighting Talia as a symbol of resilience in the face of injustice. While she never sought to become an activist, circumstances propelled her into that role. Meanwhile, the Internal Affairs investigation concluded that Mercer and Powell had acted prematurely and used excessive force. Both officers were placed on administrative leave. The district attorney pressed forward with possible criminal charges for violating Talia's civil rights. But karma wasn't done yet. Anonymous sources leaked that Mercer had a history of complaints lodged against him by residents, mostly people of color, citing harassment and intimidation tactics. Each revelation chipped away at the officer's credibility and eventually forced the police chief's hand. The day Talia learned of the final outcome, she was in her living room, having just returned from yet another interview. David was back on base, but they spoke regularly by phone or video call. For Talia, the emotional roller coaster had taken a toll, and she clung to the hope that justice would be served. Her phone buzzed with a text from Julia Dawson, her office manager. "Turn on the news." Now, Talia's heart skipped. She flipped to the local news channel. There, a grim-faced reporter stood outside the Raleigh police station, announcing that Officer John Mercer had resigned in disgrace, effective immediately. In addition, Officer Alex Powell was being suspended without pay and faced probable termination pending a departmental hearing. The department had also agreed to settle with Talia for a substantial sum to avoid a prolonged civil lawsuit. Talia sank onto the couch, relief flooding her. The settlement was a step toward restitution, though no amount of money could erase the trauma of that arrest. Still, seeing Mercer's downfall and the department's acknowledgement of wrongdoing felt like a measure of vindication. In the weeks that followed, Talia and David discovered just how their lives had changed. On the one hand, Talia was no longer just an anonymous accountant. She'd become a local figure, a beacon of perseverance. She was invited to speak at more events, to appear on talk shows. Offers poured in for everything from book deals to partnerships with civil rights organizations. But on the other hand, the emotional scars lingered. Talia had nightmares about being trapped in a cell or cornered by hostile officers. She was wary in parking lots. Her heart pounded whenever a patrol car was near. She sought therapy, determined not to let the fear rule her. David was her rock through it all. When he wasn't training, he accompanied her to public events, quietly supporting her from the sidelines. His own Delta Force community rallied around them as well, and Talia was touched by the many soldiers who reached out, offering kind words and even connections to legal advocates. Meanwhile, Mercer faced a slew of legal battles. Other wrongful arrest cases came forward. Civil rights lawyers circled. The real culprit behind the burglary ring was eventually caught, a 27-year-old man with a known criminal record, whose physical resemblance to Talia was non-existent. That final nail in the coffin proved how unjust her arrest had been. Months later, Talia and David sat on their porch, sipping sweet tea as the autumn sun began to set. The hush of the evening felt peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos that had consumed their lives. Talia reached for David's hand. "What do we do now?" she asked softly. David gave her a small smile. "We live," he said simply. "We appreciate every day. And if you want to continue raising awareness about police reform, I'll stand by you." Talia nodded, heart swelling with gratitude. "Maybe I will," she said. "I can't just pretend this never happened. If I can help even one person from going through what I went through," he squeezed her hand, "then it's worth it." They watched the sky's soft oranges and pinks fade into dusky blue. Talia leaned on David's shoulder, letting the warmth of his presence fill her. She had faced the unimaginable wrongful arrest, public humiliation, fear for her life, and come out stronger on the other side. Justice had been served, in a sense, and karma had left its mark on those who wronged her. And in that quiet moment, Talia Brown felt a sense of renewed purpose, knowing that her story, painful though it was, could inspire change. Thank you so much for watching Talia's powerful journey unfold. From the painful injustice of a wrongful arrest to the dramatic showdown where truth and accountability ultimately prevailed, this story proves how resilience can flourish under the harshest circumstances and how the actions of a single determined soldier can turn the tide. Talia's experience reminds us that by standing up for ourselves and those we love, we can challenge broken systems and hold people responsible for abuse of power. If you found this story moving, eye-opening, or inspiring, please help us spread its message. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories and real-life lessons that shine a light on courage, hope, and justice. Your support helps keep important conversations alive and fosters the positive changes we all want to see in the world. Thanks again for tuning in, and stay vigilant, stay hopeful, and keep fighting for what's right.